Sandra Dee appeared on screen far too young, a girl with a flawless complexion, wide, innocent eyes, and a smile that convinced the entire nation she was the perfect, good girl. By the late 1950s, she had become Hollywood's preeminent teenage star. Her image graced magazine covers, movie posters, and the daydreams of an audience eager to believe in a world of unspoiled innocence. Yet the girl behind the polished image was far from the icon everyone adored. From childhood, she had been meticulously controlled, molded into a template of perfection so rigid that it left little room for the real person inside to breathe. Hollywood didn't simply recognize Sandra Dee's talent, it remade her, shaped her identity, and slowly chipped away at her sense of self. Audiences saw a flawless young woman radiating sweetness on screen, but behind the camera, Sandra wrestled with fear, eating disorders, depression, and uncertainty about who she was. Her natural talent for acting, her ability to convey vulnerability, was remarkable, but in Hollywood, vulnerability could be exploited. Fame arrived before she could protect herself, and when the lights dimmed, what remained was not triumph, but a profound emptiness. Her story is not just one of early fame and eventual decline. It is a story of perfection imposed, of a life measured in images rather than moments, and of a child whose identity was sacrificed the moment the world fell in love with her. Born Alexandra Zuck in 1942 in Beyond, New Jersey, Sandra grew up in a home fractured by divorce. Her world quickly centered around her mother, Mary Zuck, and every choice, big or small, was dictated rather than discussed. Obedience became instinctual. Even money was beyond her control, earnings from modeling, advertisements, and photo shoots went directly through her mother's hands. From the earliest age, Sandra learned that her value could be quantified by contracts, yet the power to decide how to use her earnings belonged entirely to someone else. Her childhood was replaced by work. By age 4 or 5, she was in front of cameras, holding smiles until the adults around her approved, moving from one photo session to the next. Days ended in hotel rooms with tutors and plans for the following day, leaving no time for ordinary play. Praise came only for compliance. The abuse by her stepfather existed quietly within this structure, unspoken and unseen, alongside a relentless work schedule. Sandra became skilled at compartmentalizing, separating what happened in private from what was demanded publicly. Even her body was scrutinized and controlled. Lighting, costume, and camera angles dictated how she appeared. She learned to read these unspoken rules. Her body was no longer entirely her own, but a part of a crafted image. By the early 1950s, Sandra's face was a familiar presence in New York advertisements, and by 1956, her earnings reached around $75,000, a staggering sum that left no room for slowing down. School revolved around contracts, not subjects. Friends came and went with each project. Childhood didn't vanish in a single moment, it eroded gradually until only performance remained. Meals became a negotiation, weight a measure of compliance. Skipping food or limiting portions became a way to exert control over something still hers. Obedience became intertwined with hunger, and the body learned to conform silently. Discipline blurred into self-punishment. The child who once smiled effortlessly in front of cameras now learned that survival meant shrinking herself to fit expectations. Hollywood noticed her early. Until They Sail, 1957, transitioned her from modeling to film. The performance didn't create a sensation overnight, but it proved she could be relied upon, adaptable, young, and innocent. Later that year, a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year cemented her place. Universal signed not just an actress but a carefully managed persona. Every hairstyle, every outfit, every public appearance was meticulously controlled. Growing up naturally was no longer possible, it had become a managed process. By 1959, with Imitation of Life, Sandra reached a cultural apex. The film grossed over $50 million, and her face became inseparable from purity audiences expected. Gig reinforced the model, bright, sweet, non-threatening. Sandra Dee was no longer just an actress, she had become a symbol, an anchor for the type of youthful innocence Hollywood wanted. Audiences sought comfort, not transformation. Any deviation from the expected image threatened the very career built around certainty. But this protective system was also confining. Roles demanded the same youthful sweetness, the same purity. Maintaining her figure was now part of her job, and long hours, relentless photo shoots, and public appearances left no space to simply be. Marriage to Bobby Darin added layers of pressure. Pregnancy and miscarriages happened under the eye of public expectation, and medication, initially for energy and endurance, became a lifeline for grief and exhaustion. Alcohol followed, a coping mechanism for pain too quiet to speak. The traumas of childhood persisted into adulthood, shaping intimacy, self-worth, and relationships. Silence, endurance, and self-sacrifice, learned as survival skills, became habits that dictated her adult life. Conflicts with Bobby reflected two intersecting histories of pain, his urgency to live fast, hers to survive quietly. Divorce was not the failure of love, it was the recognition that she could no longer hold her past, her public persona, and her private life simultaneously. After Bobby's death at 37, isolation deepened. Alcoholism worsened, eating disorders intensified, and life slowed, heavy and quiet. The system that had once framed her image had moved on, leaving her alone with memories and wounds never fully acknowledged. In 1994, Sandra published Dream Lovers, reclaiming her story. The memoir addressed abuse, eating disorders, grief, and alcoholism, not to revive her career, but to assert ownership of a life long silenced. The book didn't erase her past, but it gave her agency, transforming invisible control into a narrative she could confront. Sandra Dee's final years were marked by illness, weakness, and the consequences of decades spent in control and survival mode. She died in 2005 quietly, without tributes or public ceremonies. The world remembered the innocent girl, but the woman who endured, struggled, and fought to reclaim herself remained largely invisible. Her legacy is complex. Sandra Dee exists in collective memory as perfection, innocence, and reassurance. Yet the real Sandra, the woman shaped by early control, silence, and sacrifice, lived a life far more complicated. She didn't fall in one dramatic moment, she wore down slowly, through each controlled meal, each silent suffering, and each loss endured privately. The tragedy was not that she became an icon, it was that she was never allowed to step away from that image. Sandra Dee's story is not just about stardom. It is about a child placed on a stage too early, never allowed to leave, and forced to live within expectations that belonged to everyone else.